Hello, everyone. Lean in India today is very excited to partner with Sipping Thoughts to bring you a session today on thinking about thinking. Different, isn't it? It's about avoiding errors in judgment with Sutapa Banerjee. She's a board member at Zomato, Godrej Properties, JSW Cement, and many, many more. She's a Harvard Leadership Fellow, decision coach, and former CEO. This is one of our many sessions in our leadership series, a program that brings thought leaders from different parts of the world, different walks of life to talk about their words of wisdom on different topics. I am Urvi Juneja, VP at Genpact, and also chapter leader at Lean in India. Today's topic talks about many interesting things about life. Why do we think the way we think? Why do we decide what we decide? When might it lead us to make errors of judgment? And can we anticipate all of that? What can we do to prevent that? What are some of the science-based tools and techniques that can help us guard against errors in judgment, individually and in organizational context? These techniques, though used actively in many, many countries around the world, have unfortunately not mainstreamed in India. Sutapa will talk about these tools, techniques, and best practices using examples from her 3 decades of experience. Now about Sutapa. Sutapa Banerjee serves as an independent board director of Zomato, Godrej, Polycab Industries, JSW Cement, Access Capital, Camlin, Fine Sciences, Neogen FinTech, and many more. She was on the board of Oxfam as well. In addition, she works as a decision coach for senior leadership talent, visiting faculty for IIM Ahmedabad, adjunct faculty at IICA, the Government of India think tank under the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. She spent 24 years in financial services industry across 2 large multinational banks, ANZ Greenlays and ABN AMRO, and a boutique Indian investment bank, Ambit. She's an Advanced Leadership Fellow at Harvard University. In 2012, she was shortlisted in the 50 Most Powerful Women by Fortune India. Just briefly about our partners, let me start with Sipping Thoughts. Sipping Thoughts is a multinational media company co-founded by Sukirti Gupta and Neeta Gudgutia. It was set up keeping in mind real women, real thoughts, a no-judgment platform where they want to create a network of women for women. And now about Lean in India. Lean in India is the official national chapter for Lean in India. It's a community founded by Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg that empowers women towards achieving their career ambitions. Lean in India aims to contribute towards encouraging more women in leadership positions through peer circles, campaigns, collaborations, and events. Our aim is to increase representation of women in leadership positions by enabling women in the workforce. With this, I want to hand over the mic to Sutapa. It's all yours, Sutapa.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that very long introduction of myself. Thank you very much to everybody who's logged in on a Sunday evening. I hope I can make your 1 hour worthwhile. I'm going to start by actually putting my neck on the block. I have never been a huge fan of leadership talks because I've always found it to be a rehash of old ideas, new wine in an old bottle, etc. So, I'm going to sort of try and in the short period, try my best to ensure that I leave you with sparking a few questions, looking at a few things that you do differently, and leaving you with at least 1 or 2 or 3 insights, something new which you've not heard before and which is practical and usable and makes sense. The subject that I'm going to talk about, which is behavioral insights, it's actually at the intersection of a number of subjects. Economics, psychology, sociology, evolutionary biology, and in the last couple of decades, neuroscience. So the reason for me telling you that is it is nuanced. There is intellectual rigor. This is not about pop psychology, the 5 things that you need to do to better decision making. It isn't that. Social sciences is not an exact science. It is based, however, on 6 to 7 decades of empirical research. and in the last couple of decades, cross-validated in many ways by neuroscience, which is really brain research. So keeping the fact that it is nuanced, I kind of spend the last hour trying to figure, how do I tread the line between keeping it simple and lucid? Because, I wouldn't have understood the subject 8 years back had I not, somewhat by design and somewhat by default, gone into it. And I know attention spans of most people are relatively small. So it needs to be simple, but not simplistic. So I don't want to tread anywhere into the area where a lot of consultants peddle psychology, which is of the kind which I think harms the subject rather than does anything good. So with that preamble, what I'm going to do is I do these workshops which run for a day. The shortest I've done is about 2 hours. So this is a challenge to me. So it would be really nice if people unmute themselves when I raise questions and just say yes, no, maybe, whatever. It just, helps me get a sense of the audience. I'm going to raise some questions. I'm not very sure the time will permit me to answer all of them, but if you have a pen and paper or if you have great memory, just store it. And either the curators, Urvi and Suki, will ask me those questions, or you can ask me those questions, or you could ask me something more interesting and I'll try my best to answer. And I'll focus on a couple of things in a little bit detail, giving you actual tools and techniques which make sense, rather than superficially run through many, right? It's a vast subject, so I will take 1 or 2 which I think would be most pertinent. Now, the fact is, I have been running businesses. I've actually been sort of a business head for 23, 24 years before going into Harvard and then, studying this fascinating subject, which has now become an addiction. And as I said, it's a lot of empirical research. So research keeps coming every single day. And so when I look at the research, while I'm fascinated by the subject, I still use a practitioner's lens. So if this is what the research says about the subject, what can I do with it? How can I put it to use, right? And now in my workshops, in my decision coaching, in the boards, unobtrusively, that's what I try to use. And none of this was known to me 8 years ago. So, so it's basically a juxtaposition of somebody who's run businesses, who's now actually looking at academia. And in these 7, 8 years, I've also, sort of spent time in the nonprofit world, in social enterprises, so kind of had my tentacles in many things. And the reason why I'm again saying that is actually does something to the way you think, which is really the topic of this evening. So let me raise the questions first. So many of us have an email address, and we have our name and we have our designation, and sometimes we have a line or 2 below it. So mine says, good decisions can lead to bad outcomes. Bad decisions can lead to good outcomes, hence with a question mark. Now, I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm self-employed. I don't belong to any company, so this is not exactly my logo. But this is pretty much what this session is about. It's about sparking questions. I hope I'm going to be able to answer that question. If I don't, catch me on it and actually make me answer it. So that's the first one. The second one reads, and a lot of things here are going to be counterintuitive. And the challenge is anything counterintuitive and nuance takes time to explain and convert you into that way of thinking. So you need to help me along the way. It's also a challenge to me for 20 to 25 minutes, try and give you insightful takeaways. So the second question is it possible to change behavior before you change beliefs and attitudes and mindsets? We always say we make up our mind, or we change our mind, and only then will change in behavior happen, right? Is it possible to do the reverse? Is it possible to have behavior change come ahead of a change in beliefs and mindsets? And I hope to answer that question too. The other one is about minds. Can we ever rid our minds of bias? Is it even possible to have a debiased mind? All of us feel we are very objective and somebody else is biased. The truth is all of us are biased, but is it possible to have tools and techniques which can debias your mind? Last 2 questions. Is it easier to change behavior and thinking in a group or for an individual? And the last one, we talk of no discrimination policies, right? Do you think if you have a no discrimination policy and you implement it rigorously, would it ensure a merit-centric approach or a merit-oriented company? So anybody has any thoughts on any of these questions? Feel free to unmute and say something before I jump straight into it.
So they won't be able to unmute, but please do keep writing to us in the chat. We will be unmuting everybody at the end.
All right. Okay. So let me jump straight in. So to answer these questions, I'm going to start with two things which actually affect our judgment: bias and noise. And these are two very different things. Just to quickly put it in perspective, if you had a dart board and you have the bullseye in the center, and all your darts go in, let's say, the right-hand corner, top right-hand corner, that's your slant. That's where you're biased, right? If you're hitting your darts and it's going all over the place, but not coming anywhere close to the bullseye, it means it is random error. There is no slant, but there are tons of errors and it's random. That's the difference between bias and noise. Now, if you come to the word bias, it has a lot of negative connotations, right? You immediately think of somebody being biased towards someone or against someone, or biases against women. So let me go back into what bias is. All of us are biased, by the way, men, women, all of us, right? And there must be an evolutionary reason, and there must be a good reason why we have it. Otherwise, why would it be selected and why would we still have it? So what I want to dispel the notion is that biases are bad. Biases are there because it's good to have them and because they help us most of the time, right? And let me give an example. So in hunter-gatherer times, if you saw somebody seeing, a yellowish figure and you see people running, everybody else ran in that direction. You didn't want to go, you didn't need to spot the full tiger for yourself. You ran because others ran. You conformed to what others did. Jump straight into what we do today. I walk out into the road, I'm crossing the road to go in a particular direction. I see people running in the opposite direction. I will follow all of them and run in the opposite direction. I will not go on my way to discover whether there is a smoke or a bomb or a fire or some fighting going on or whatever. So this is conformity bias, right? So it's a bias that we have. Bias has a negative connotation. The moment the word conformity is said, is mentioned, we again think there could be negative connotations to it. But this is what keeps us going. It's part of our cognitive makeup. It's part of our brain. It's what keeps us alive. And evolutionarily, anything which is there for a reason to make us survive. So that's what conformity bias is. And this is just one example of the many biases that we have, and they're all there for a good reason. However, in certain situations, in certain circumstances, while they stand us in good stead most of the time, they actually act to our detriment and they make us commit errors of judgment. Okay, so if you look at what it can do, and I'm going to give you share an example. It's a experiment in psychology which is quite old, and it has been done in multiple ways. In fact, most of the studies and what I would quote has been replicated multiple times. So that's the reason why I call it science. Social sciences is not an exact science, but it's a science because it's empirical evidence which has been replicated multiple times. So this is called the Solomon-Asch experiment. And without getting into the details, in the experiment, basically there are 3 lines shown. Okay, let's, for the purposes of this meeting, assume that one is about 10 inches, one is 24, one is 36. And these 3, lines are there, and you're shown one more line. And in the experiment, which was done between 5 to 8 people, all of the people except one are stooges. They are part of the experimenters' people, and they have been told to give the wrong answer. So when the new line is shown, say it is, 6 inches, you know that there is another line which is 6 inches and the 2 are conforming to each other, but you deliberately give the wrong answer. You say this one corresponds to line C, which is 36 inches, right? And it's done with 5 to 8 people. So let's say there are 8 people, 7 people ahead of you say the wrong answer. What happens to the 8th person? Supposedly, we like to believe what we see, right? Eyes don't lie. In about 75% of the people gave a wrong answer at least once. Now, this is conformity bias playing out at its worst, where it's lines. These are lines which are so big, and it is your eyesight. Even people with specs, who have power in their eyes are able to see it, but they are giving the wrong answer. In other words, the pressure to conform is so high that you disbelieve your own eyes. And very interestingly, neuroscience, where through fMRI, etc., you can look at the brain. What it now shows that you actually change your mind. You actually have doubts and you disbelieve what you think you heard, because the whole idea is that 7 people can't possibly be wrong, right? So there must be something that I am seeing wrong. So that's how strong conformity bias is, and this is a straightforward, matter-of-fact thing. They're just the other people in the experiment are strangers. Imagine conformity in a situation where there are large groups of people who are your own people. You have a shared place, history, culture. If the problem could be a little complex or ambiguous, what would happen? Take it straight into, let's say, the business world. And by I don't mean business, I mean organizations, right? It could be nonprofit or a business or a social enterprise. What happens in any issue that you're discussing, be it in the boardroom, be it in a session with the management team, when you have a number of people saying, or somebody speaks first and gives a point of view, and that person happens to be either the boss or socially dominant, and then 2 other people toe the line, what's the probability of the 4th or the 5th person in the group saying or speaking their mind? I mean, we have a lot of people saying we have a very open culture and this doesn't happen and everybody is open and freely speaks their mind. Largely, people tend to toe the line or at least tone down their point of view. And sometimes, and it happens to all of us, if there are people who we respect, who we think speak sense, who we think are very insightful, say something, even though our point of view is different and 3 people agree with that person, we do not speak out. We change our point of view, or we don't say anything, right? And that is what is called groupthink and can be extremely dangerous. Imagine the concept of, imagine when you're making a key hire and you're sitting in a group interview and interviewing somebody. The socially dominant person's point of view, it's been empirically proven many times, carries through. All points of views, if there are 4 people or 5 people interviewing, are not heard. Second example, which happens in companies often, mergers and acquisitions. More often than not, it's driven by the passion of the promoter or somebody else. Of course, there's tons of paperwork which come along with it. But if you're very clear that the bent is towards making this acquisition happen and the boss is the one driving it, how often would anybody have a point of view which is different? Now, so what's the, with everything, as I said, I'm not going to be able to capture or work on too many things or share too many of these biases and how do you come again, how do you try to mitigate it. But I want to go on 1 or 2 in depth so that there is a takeaway which is very clear and it's not left completely hanging open. There will be a few things which will hang open. And that's, as I said, my whole idea is that it sparks curiosity and interest in the subject. If I can sort of pass on some of my own excitement and fascination for the subject to you, I think, that would be satisfying to me. But the second objective is also that you have at least a couple of takeaways. So when you have a situation where you would like all views, because that is what is healthy and that is what improves the robustness of a decision. And that, there will be some people who are more articulate, who are more socially dominant, who could be the boss in this situation. And we are all victims of hierarchy to a certain degree. The degrees may vary. What then can you do in the environment which legitimizes dissent, where you can get a different point of view out, right? And that's where there is a lot of research, and there will be 1 or 2 people whose research I will be talking about in a big way. This one comes from Daniel Kahneman, and he did it with another gentleman called Gary Klein, and they actually got a technique And it was actually a technique, just to give you an anecdote, which was discussed in one of the World Economic Forum debates. And Kahneman actually heard one person say that my trip to the World Economic Forum is just justified by just this one technique that I've learned. So what's the technique? The technique is, so suppose, let's assume in this instance, you're doing an acquisition, right? And it's very clear. And it's very clear that, whatever, the pros and cons may have been sort of gone through, but it's very clear that you're going ahead with it, right? And we know that mergers and acquisitions, I mean, empirically, if you look at it across the world, not just in India, a larger number of them fail than succeed by a fairly significant margin. So what do you do to be able to capture all views, knowing that irrespective of how open a culture you think you are, all views are not coming to the table? The technique is called pre-mortem. And what it means, you've heard of post-mortem. Post-mortem is what you do after the patient has died or the person has died. Pre-mortem is you tell people in the management team or in the board that, let's assume we are 5 years down or 3 years down and the decision has been wrong. The acquisition was a failure, right? Our market prices dipped, we've done badly. Let's assume we are already in that scenario. Looking at all of the data that you have in front of us, tell us or imagine yourself to be in a situation where you now say what could have gone wrong, right? What you're doing is extremely interesting. What you're doing is you're legitimizing dissent. You're asking people deliberately to think the opposite of what they may have thought, or people who did not voice their point of view to actually come out and speak. Right? So this is a technique which is actually now used in quite a few companies. I've not seen it, to be honest, in any Indian company, but this is what is called a design intervention. You are assuming that people will be biased. They will all conform. Conformity bias rules from evolutionary times. It's not going to go away by announcing that, we are an open culture or whatever. So you do an intervention such that you legitimize what you want and people are not scared to give their point of view. Now, empirically, what has been found is even companies which use this, in some instances, not all, they go ahead with the decision. But it does a very interesting thing. What it does is it immediately helps the team, the company, create a plan B. You have a plan B and you guard yourself against all that you think could have wrong, basis the collective wisdom of that management team or the board of directors. And that is an extremely valuable thing to have. So that's just one example of, how conformity bias can take you astray. It leads us to negotiate the world and live our everyday lives well. But in a certain context, in this instance, a business context, which is not there in hunter-gatherer times, our brains are not equipped to deal with it. We will continue to behave the way we usually behave. We will not change. And hence, you do something in the environment. You design an intervention to make sure the bias does not come in the way, or at least gets mitigated. Okay, so that's one. I want to give one example.
Before we go ahead, just
Yeah.
a question that's coming up. A lot of people are asking, is it like pros and cons or SWOT? Can you explain that a little bit further before we move on to the next example?
No, so this is not pros or cons or SWOT or any of those things. Basically, when you discuss anything, what I'm talking about is we all have our points of view. Is the environment the kind where we are able to completely and honestly express that point of view? More often than not, we are guided by a set of things which are happening. It could be hierarchy. And I deliberately gave, because it's the most sort of interesting example, is one of a M&A. It's an acquisition happening. And you can understand from the tone of the meeting that the senior most people, in most instances, the promoter, wants to go ahead with it, right? But you want it passed in the boardroom, or you want it passed by the management team who come together to take the decision and sign off on the decision together, right? How do you make sure that you get all points of view? Because the only way that you can avoid groupthink is by having independent, uncorrelated opinions. That's the importance of diversity. I'm sorry to say that most people in the corporate context don't quite understand what diversity means. It can come, and we'll go into that topic maybe later on, but independent, uncorrelated views of a diverse group of people is what makes for a robust decision. But just getting those people into the conference room will not work. You need to create an environment where that diversity can thrive, that those diverse opinions can come out. And what I just described pre-mortem is a technique which allows that to come up. Shouting from the rooftops and announcing, please give your point of view, is not going to do it. Pre-mortem is a technique which, as I use the word very carefully, it legitimizes, it makes dissent legitimate. You're asking people to dissent and give the opposite point of view, right? And that's what helps you create a plan B. So that's what, what you need to do to to go away from conformity bias, or to defeat, or to prevent that bias from lowering or from creating an error in the collective judgment of the group. Independent, uncorrelated views, and creating the environment to drive or to ensure that those views come out, right? I'm going to give one example of, I'm trying to get the exact data and the date to be able to share another example of conformity bias, but used in the way it ought to be used. And this is going into a very different area. So this is going into policy making. And this is 2011. And this was used by the British government. And this is one government which actually has what is called the BIT, a Behavioral Insight Scheme. I follow them very actively. So it's very experimental. Everything is experiment. You don't assume that you know. You experiment, you learn, and then you figure how you go about it. In 2011, it sent out letters to 3 groups of people, okay? The first group got a letter which said 9 out of 10 people pay their taxes on time. The second group got a letter which said 9 out of 10 people in the UK pay their taxes on time. The third said 9 out of 10 people in the UK pay their taxes on time. You are currently in the very small minority of people who have not paid us yet. No surprises. The third letter generated a tax revenue of over $3 million in less than a month. What does it show? It shows, it gives us an insight which we can use in many things. It shows, and it answers one of the questions that I raised. It shows that we like to do what people like us have done. We have a herding instinct or a conformity bias, which doesn't allow, or it doesn't make us feel good to be left out, to be the odd person out, right? We like to feel that we're part of the group. That's the reason why the third one won by a huge, and there are many such experiments. I've just given one. So that's where you're using conformity bias as a nudge to make people move in a particular direction, which is also a way of actually answering the question that, am I changing? People here, their beliefs about paying taxes could be whatever, right? I mean, which was the reason they had not paid their taxes on time. They could be lax, they could be whatever. But you've used a nudge, and you've used a very interesting human behavioral insight to be able to nudge them to behave in the way you want. So this is using conformity bias the way you ought to use them. So that's on conformity bias. Any questions on it? I'm happy to take on Suki or Urvi. Otherwise, I'm going to go to the other item, which is noise.
We'll take lots of questions in the Q&A. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I spoke about bias, and I spoke about noise, and I explained that noise is random error, while bias is a slant in a particular direction, right? So if you look at noise, and the same person who I mentioned, Daniel Kahneman, who's actually, that's an interesting aside, and a very interesting one, is he's a psychologist, one of the most renowned and preeminent psychologists of our time, in his 80s right now. He won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2002. So it's a very interesting thing to think that somebody who came completely outside the silo to change the fundamental tenet of a discipline which has been there for donkey's years. And the tenet that he changed is that people are not necessarily rational. Now, I'm an economics undergrad. And when I first read that book, it shook me because I thought, oh my God, how is something like this, which is so obvious, wasn't so obvious to us? And then I figured, why me? I'm small fry. There are tons and tons of people who won Nobel Prizes year after year who've never questioned this. All of economics, standard classical economics, is based on the fact that human beings are rational, a fundamental tenet which in psychology has never been true. But so that's siloing, and siloing is there in organizations, in everything. But this is how dramatic breaking a silo can do. But let me actually explain noise to you by using the same person, Daniel Kahneman, and his book called Noise recently got released. But a lot of his research has been available for some time. As he does his research, he releases that. And in a lot of my workshops, I've actually used this. So I've defined noise for you. Now, he studied two kinds of companies, or he did this experiment to two companies, company A and company B. And these are companies where, it could be companies which give out loans, which means banks or non-bank finance companies, or it could be underwriters, insurance claim underwriters. Let's say you take the experiment that he did with insurance underwriters. So people are processing a claim, okay? And he took 4 cases. The cases were developed by the people in the organization, right? And he took 70 professionals, right? Now, if the case is identical, right? If the insurance claim is identical and 70 professionals are looking at it, you would assume ideally the answer should be identical, but we use a term which we call a matter of judgment, right? Which means what? That you allow for some error, you allow for some variability, right? And how much would that be? Our intuitive answer is 5 to 10%. Kahneman asked the company, how much would you expect it to be? And then they said, yeah, around 10%, maybe 12%. Now, when you actually look at the difference in the claims between any two of these individuals, and we're talking 70 individuals, guess how much that difference came out to be. He created a noise index, which is amalgamating for every 2 pairs of those 70, how much the difference is. The difference was a staggering 48% for one company and 62% in another. This experiment then got replicated multiple times, and the variation is between 46 to 76%. So all things identical, 2 people looking at the same set of data, coming to conclusions which vary by as much as 46 to 70%. This is variability which is useless. Useless variability, very expensive for organization, costs millions and millions and millions of dollars, right? Why does it happen? Why does noise happen? So another economist this time, a behavioral economist, won the Nobel in 2017. His name is Richard Thaler, calls these he calls them SIFs, S-I-F-S. SIFs is supposedly irrelevant factors. What are the things which affect us? Mood, weather, when did we have our last meal?
Coffee.
The difference is staggering. Coffee. Yes. So it's something you wouldn't like to believe. It's something which doesn't seem right, right? We also think sometimes, it can happen to some people, not all, right? So in that experiment, he also, I'm shuffling papers to actually give you the statistics correctly. He looked at people with more experience, 5 to 6 years experience, not newcomers. Unfortunately, the variability increased. In one instance, it stayed at 62%. In another instance, it went up to from 46 to 48%. Okay, so experience does nothing to reduce the errors or the noise, which is a noise-free job. A noise-free job would be something like a bank teller, right? Everything is crystal clear, right? You count it, you're using a counting machine, there is no chance of error. What are the jobs which have ample noise? Loan officers, medical professionals, judges, project managers, insurance underwriters. So when it comes to valuing stocks, appraising real estate, sentencing criminals, appraising the performance of individuals, these are things which are rife with noise. So unless you're able to detect the signal from the noise, chances are there would be huge variability, right? And this is something which took, when these experiments were done, when he did this as a consulting assignment and shared it with the company was shocked, right? And all of these jobs are guided by 2 things. They are guided by experience and they're guided by general principles. So how do you get rid of it is obvious if you look at those two things. If something is guided by general principles and these errors are happening, the point is to structure it as clearly and as detailed a manner as possible, right? That's the only way in which your sources of information need to be accurate. Of course, you can get it done through algorithms, and you can get it done through robotics, or you can get it done completely using, completely avoiding human interface. But in our world, we like to exercise judgment. So the only way then, if it's going to be done by human beings and not by machines, is that you structure the questions as much as possible so the chances of variability reduce dramatically. Each question has to be answered independently, right? If you look at it in the context of a company, right, and you go back to the example of a merger or an acquisition or a key hire, these are my two favorite examples. You're hiring a CEO of a business, or you're doing a merger and an acquisition, right? Noise and bias both play into this and create errors of judgment. What can you do to take it out? But before that, I want to sort of talk about something very interesting. There are certain things, however, where experience and practice, we all believe that as we move up the corporate echelon hierarchy, experience helps us do our job better, right? What I just showed empirically is that it is not true in certain jobs, right? And the more you use judgment, the more senior you get, the more you tend to use judgment, the more it tends to get flawed. Now, that's not my point of view. That is what data has shown, right? So the question is then very interesting. What can you do, or what are the kind of areas where experience and practice actually are valuable? And there are three examples that I can think of off the cuff. One is a game of chess, tennis, driving. What's common between all of them? The rules of the games are clearly laid out. There is complete predictability in the environment. You get feedback, which is very frequent. When you're driving, your feedback is very frequent, right? You cross the lane, you go on to something else, you're immediately fined. And it is immediate, and it is repeated. So you can't afford to make mistakes, right? So that's how it gets internalized and becomes almost a habit. So predictable, if you look at chess, you look at tennis, the rules are laid down and you keep getting better and better and better at it. What happens in real life, in corporations, whether in organizations, whether it's businesses or nonprofits or any academic institutions, anything? How predictable is the environment? Forget the pandemic, even in the last 10, 12 years, market cycles have become shorter. The problems keep changing because the market is evolving so quickly. So if the environment is not predictable, how valuable is our experience? It's not to say that you throw experience out of the window, completely, but you need to have the humility to understand that if I've been successful in the past, I may not be successful going forward, because my brain, my cognitive makeup is such that I will use what has worked for me successfully in the past in future. And more than ever in today's world, it doesn't work, which is why, you talk of cognitive diversity, people who think differently, coming together. Their views must be independent and uncorrelated. Going back, you need an environment which allows that. And I gave the example of a pre-mortem, which is when you're able to reduce noise and bias. And Kahneman actually says, in his example, he actually says that, so he, did it, he first saw evidence of noise and bias he's an Israeli, in the recruitment of the Israeli army. And he told them, you will have to have 6 questions. They come in the same order. You ask them, you record your responses, you collate them. There is nothing called an overall impression. That will happen separately. So the people actually said, you're making us robots. And that's exactly what you would think if you were to do it in an interview, right? So the best interview, an unstructured interview, the correlation with success, I don't remember the exact figure, but it is almost 0. It's a very tiny figure. So an unstructured interview where we are having a chat, which is the way I've recruited most of my life, is something which is like throwing a dart on a dartboard. 50% chance, you'll be fine. You've got a great recruit. 50%, so it's completely chance ridden. It has no validity. It has no, but what could be some of the other things? Everything which a work test, anything that you value, you need to test it, right? But our feeling is that at senior levels, how can you put people through tests? So that's, a lot of companies are doing it, right? So that's an example of how you cut out noise and bias. And when you've analyzed each of those 6 questions, as Kahneman did in that interview, and in some progressive companies, we've done it in one, you can actually do it. What that means is you're still taking an overall call, but you've assessed each criteria. There are 6 important criteria for a hire or for making an acquisition happen. You are weighting and you are giving the weightages and you're evaluating each of them separately. Once you've done it separately and you add it and then you take the final call, then your judgment is far more robust. Chances of error reduces. And he actually sums it up beautifully, and I'm going to just quote that little bit, which is, when we say it's a matter of judgment, we are implicitly saying that there's variability. What is judgment? Judgment is actually measurement. But how are you measuring? You're informally measuring in your mind, right? By what I just described, breaking it up into questions, judging each statement or each factor, or doing the cost benefit individually and not overall. You do it in what tends to happen is we do it individually, but we know what we've scored in the first one. And that's the first impressions matter. So when you're doing it question by question, right? And you're not even sort of your answer or what you've given as an evaluation to the first question is not colored by the second. That's when it's independent, right? And then when you look at all of those data and take the final call, whether it's in the case of a key hire or whether it's in the case of an acquisition, that's when you've delayed your intuition. So he calls it delayed intuition. Your intuition is still coming into play. You're still making a human call, but that makes it, and if there's enough empirical evidence, that makes the judgment far more robust and stronger. So that's on just one item. I spent sufficient amount of time because I wanted people to understand the 2 big ones, bias and noise. And I used one bias and just a basic idea of noise to give you a sense of how judgments can go awry. And I've given some techniques of how you can bring it back in line, structuring it. There are names for it. And these are used actively, but that gets into a workshop format to discuss it in greater detail. But if there are questions, happy to answer it as and when they come. So I will stop now, and we can get into the curated questions if you like, and the audience questions, or do you want me to speak some more? I'm happy to do that. Suki, leave that to you.
No, I think we have lots of questions. I'd like to kick off because this raises a big question, and especially when we see, and this is not one of the curated ones, because I'm going totally off track. But the first question that comes into my mind now is about AI, right? Because we're talking about that, and even within AI, which they're saying is the best of the best, but because we're using so much data, the data itself is biased, hence we're getting biased answers. And that comes to my question, which is that men and women tend to think differently, and they're seeing that these biases that we are talking about is even inherent when we're looking at technology-based solutions.
Yeah, so
does that make sense, my question?
I've understood your question, but I'm going to answer it in 2 parts. And I'm looking myself for a little bit of data to actually address that first part, where you said that men and women think differently. And I want to actually bust the myth there. Okay. There are 2 things. And this is, I think it came out just 6 months back. It's called the, I'm trying to give you the name of the university. It's the Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science. And what they did is they collected differences between men's and women's brains, including performance across a range of tasks. They collected this data over decades because different people have done different pieces of research on this. And they coalesced this entire data and arrived at a meta-synthesis. And the neuroscientist who finally put that into words, her name is Dr. Lise Elliott. She's the one who led the studies. And the answer was hardly at all. the difference between male and female brains is non-existent. It's a myth. This is a syndrome which has been made popular, and media has played a phenomenal role in this, right? Whenever there are any differences in any study, it's flashed in huge. Whenever there are no differences, nobody talks about it, right? So this is the, men from Mars, women from Venus, or whatever it is, that syndrome. And it's a myth which has been completely busted. So that's number one. Having said that, if there is no difference, and this is something, this idea that there is a difference has led to many problems. One of the key one is basically about maths and numerical ability and math scores, right? It's a fascinating thing, because I'm going to quote one more study which came out in Science Daily in 2008, which spoke about the gender equality in a country and math scores and the correlation between them. And the correlation in the Scandinavian countries, and this is a 2008 study, were negligible. In Iceland, which is, arguably the most gender equal country in the world, girls outperformed boys. And in the countries where gender equality is low, the girls performed far worse, leading to a reinforcement of the stereotype that there is a difference in the ability of girls and boys. So what that shows is something very interesting. It shows that biology and environment interplay in very nuanced ways. And environment is a big driver of the result that you get. Biologically, there is no difference. And which is why I keep saying both men and women have biases. If you lead me to believe that I am not good at maths, I will not be good at maths, right? So that's a very, very important takeaway from this, right? So that's the first part of the answer. Your second part was these biases, what happens when it goes into AI and machine learning? And that's a very interesting question. And the point is that unless people who are feeding in data realize that the data they're feeding in is indeed biased, you will get biased results from data. And then you throw up your arms and say, no, but the machine threw it out. I mean, how can that be inaccurate? How can we misjudge data? But what is the data that the machine is learning from? Machine learning today is completely, it's an area of huge interest for me, AI, robotics, and machine learning. It is learning from a lot of data. It's doing trial and error, and it is getting better. Now, if all of the data that you're giving, and look at the kind of, if you have somebody who is an assistant being constantly given a woman's name, perpetuate one more stereotype, right? So, everything that you feed in, unless it is unbiased, which means all of the people who are feeding in the data have got that level of understanding, you will certainly go into more dangerous territory than you are today.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. Over to you, Urvi. And then we're taking audience questions. We'll start with Dr. Vandana and then Mudit. Go ahead, Urvi.
Sure. So first of all, very, very interesting thoughts, Sutapa. Very interesting conversation, very, very engaging. My mind is so intrigued right now. I want to take this noise and bias idea to a different level. Can we as humans train our mind to think differently? And do you think we can therefore wire the human brain to think for success?
So, let me give you not my opinion, but what data has shown again and again and again. There is a lot of work in neuroscience, which is fascinating, which goes by the name of neuroplasticity, which means that, our brain gets wired across species. The mammals, and particularly humans among that, have the largest period from infancy to adulthood, right? In the case of, if you look at dogs, cats, any others, they grow up very quickly, right? And our prefrontal cortex, which is the rational or the thinking part of our brain, and I'm making a simplification there because it's not the only thinking part, but that part actually comes into full development. It matures at the age of 25, right? So if the teenagers are impulsive, you know why? It's a natural part of their growing up. So if you're looking at, and our brain is constantly absorbing cues. It absorbs subliminal cues as much as it observes overt cues, right? And that's what's storing the brain, because what the brain does is essentially, in the most efficient way, predict what you are going to do so that you are able to survive and carry on life. And which is why it keeps making shortcuts, right? So first impressions. So you're dressed in a particular way, you look a particular way, and it keeps categorizing things from objects to social categories. And when it makes social categories, what does it look at? Race, sex, gender particularly, right? Because men and women look different, right? And it keeps categorizing and it keeps predicting, right? So let me give you some very normal kind of examples before I get into your specific question, because it's a very interesting one. And there's an acronym that Kahneman uses, which is, again, one of the takeaways I'd love for people who are listening to this session have. It's called WYSIATI, WYSIATI. What you see is all there is. So from the time of my infancy to the time that I've grown up, what I'm seeing is the reality to me. It can't be anything else, right? So if I see my mother staying at home and working and taking care of the home, and I see my father going out and working, that's what I'll assume is normal. If all the cues that I see around me show a woman as largely a housewife and sometimes a secondary earner, and men being the primary earner, that's what I would assume is the reality, right? I may read in some books about something else happening in some country, but this is my reality. And this is what gets wired into my brain, right? So if I also see that most of the primary school teachers, nurses are women, I will assume that that is what women do. The more dangerous part is, from WYSIATI, is what is. So what is descriptive, what is describing the reality today becomes prescriptive. What is becomes what should be. If CEOs of banks are men and nurses and primary school teachers are women, it must be because that's what they're good at. So, men are ruling the echelons of the financial services world because that must be what they're good at. So it's very normal. So, shouting from the rooftops is not going to change any of this. You need to accept that that is what we see and that is what is normal. And which brings me back to the rewiring of the brain. So the brain has seen this for a long period of time, right? Rewiring a human brain is very difficult and extremely time consuming. What then is more interesting, and which is what behavioral insights is all about, and that is one of the questions that I raised, is before you rewire your mind and change beliefs and attitudes, can you solve the problem by changing behavior, right? And let me give you one example. I'm making this a long answer because this is, again, a very interesting area that we touched on. In the Panchayati Raj that we have in India, in our local self-governance, in the eastern part of India, where I actually come from, in the villages, one of the most patriarchal parts of our country, where men did not want to vote women to power, in about a certain number of villages, women, because it is a quota system, they were forced to vote for women 2 terms in a row. Now, the interesting thing is what happened after that, right? Once that happened, and this was being studied, right? Our Panchayati Raj system has been studied particularly by the Ivy League universities enormously because it was all random. So it was just a perfect place to study it experimentally, right? Because you have a random sample and you have a control and you have a treatment group, right? Now, in the treatment group, what happens compared to the control is dramatic. The age at which girls were getting married off increased substantially. They were allowed to study far longer. So the socio-economic dynamic of those villages changed dramatically. So we have this whole thing that social norms and cultural norms take years and centuries. It doesn't. What happened? All that happened is they saw women in power. WYSIATI, what you see is all there is. Suddenly seeing women in power for 10 years just normalized it. Just like we normalized the CEO of a bank being a man, right? Here, women being in power and being the leader in the local self-government suddenly got normalized. Men suddenly saw that girls could actually do this. So, let them get a chance to do it. So it's as simple as this. And there are many examples similarly of, giving only girls in villages a chance to work, and, in preference to the boys, and what happens then. So the moment you normalize this, which is why I'm a huge believer that when it comes to gender, non-traditional livelihoods is what you need to encourage. Let men do the stitching of uniforms and making pickle. Let the girls drive the cars. Let them drive the three-wheeler. It's extremely important. It's way more important than we think it is. So that's about breaking stereotypes, because that's how you normalize and change something. Yeah.
Dr. Vandana, go ahead. Okay. Muddath, go ahead, Dr. Vandana.
Sorry. Okay. Can I? So,
Yeah.
Sukirti, can I?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Thank you, Sukirti, and good evening, everyone, and Ms. Tapa. You are an expert, but the way you brought down that, the topic in the session, absolutely interesting. And when I wrote down those 5 questions, I realized, at the end of this talk, I realized that all of them were so very well connected, and it made you think throughout that session. And I kept going back to those questions. Now, I just wanted to ask you, as we started the session, saying, that conformity is really important. But what happens, when we have a diverse group and the real voices are not heard? Sometimes it could be because of intimidation, sometimes because of the peer pressure, or, sometimes some of them are introverts and they don't want to speak out. That sometimes lead to bad decisions. Now, and reverting a bad decision, it's very difficult. How do we get that diverse group together and we find that, everyone is heard? That also you mentioned that, it can be done independently, but sometimes, the decision makers don't have that much of patience or that much of time to go through it. So how do we bring everyone at a common platform? How do we do this? Because this happens everywhere.
Okay, so it's a great question, and that's exactly what I tried to answer through that technique of pre-mortem. I'm not going to repeat that technique because you've understood it, and you're absolutely right that it takes time, it takes investment of time to be able to do it. So one of the things that we must remember is shortcuts are there for a reason, right? We can't paralyze all of the time. So one of the things I think which we need to recognize is that the size of the decision or the importance of the decision should be commensurate with the time that you spend on it, right? So for a key decision, so I took very key decisions which are in the business or in an organizational context really, really important. So I took the hire of a key resource like a CEO. I took a merger and an acquisition decision because tons and tons of money is going into it. So those are key decisions. So there is no question of a shortcut there, and which is why I introduced that term of pre-mortem. Having said that, suppose you want to have a team meeting, which is at the mid-level group, right? And you want everything to be heard. And let me be completely humble and say, I've never done that myself, right? Because, this is a question I keep asking myself, that with the wisdom of my last 8 years, if I were to redo some of the jobs that I did, what would I discard and what would I keep? And I don't want to sort of quantify, but I think half of what I did, I'll throw away. Having said that, I had a reasonably successful career. And that I'm digressing, but that brings me to the luck, that the role that chance or luck plays. But we, of course, think that it's all because of what we've done. Now, anyway, so what I was saying is, so many of us, and I've been a typical type A leader all my life, is let's not paralyze, let's arrive at the decision. There's a huge out there. We need to go out and get business. And that's what I see a lot of people in most of business is. But again, there are simple things to do. So if you're going to take a decision in a meeting, a decision on any issue, and that issue needs to be read by all, the simplest way to do it, and this is not just at the mid-level, this is, and it can go even at the board level, is to actually get people's views ahead. Let them email it. Right? Do not arrive at a consensus in a group meeting because the socially dominant person or the boss will always hold me. In one of the boards that I'm in, I found that the promoter was also there, and the CEO was also there. And as an independent director, you judge the key resources, right? And so when it came to the independent director meeting and I had to judge, and I said, I can't say anything because he's never spoken. And, 2 years hence, we actually judge him very well with one thing, which we told the promoter, which is that, listen, the CEO is not going to have a point of view which is different to yours if you've already given that point of view earlier. So what you need to do is to not say what you have to say first. The simple thing is you hold back. You hear other people's views. So whoever is the more socially dominant person, or in case it is hierarchically the leader or the head of the business or the CEO or whoever, the promoter, you come last. So that's one simple technique. Allowing people to give their views in writing to the leader is another, so that when you're coming to the room to discuss, you have points of views which are separate, which makes the decision process so much more robust.
Thank you. Mudit, we'll take your question next.
Thank you. Apologies for joining late. I was hearing actually Shannon Lee, daughter of my childhood hero, Bruce Lee, on Be Like Water, My Friend, a similar topic. But I can watch you on social media. And it's very insightful conversation. And that's why I was engaged and posting comments. My question is, how do you develop this feeling of Sakshi Bhav, which is going out of your body to see yourself, not in a spiritual sense, but to observe yourself just by putting a camera and observing? Or I would like to cultivate that. Can you throw some light, Dr. Sutapa? Thank you.
Firstly, I'm not a doctorate. I don't have a PhD. So I'm Sutapa. I'm not a Dr. Sutapa at all. Second, I don't think, I'd like to venture into an area where I don't have knowledge. So I wouldn't know how you can sort of do that. Objectivity, I don't think is something that can be cultivated. The only things we can do at an individual level. There was a question which I raised, is it easier to change behavior in a group, or is it easier to do it in an individual? A group allows far greater, it's amenable to change because the techniques that you can use are a lot more, right? And one of the things which I mentioned is, we tend to do what people like us do. So that's one of the things that you can do in a group framework, where completely individually you may or may not be able to do it. Individually, the only thing I will say to bring objectivity, and I'm not going to venture into the area that you've seen because that's not my area at all, is objectivity can only come by not being impulsive. As Kahneman says, our brain is a machine which jumps to conclusion. That's the way our cognitive makeup is. So the only things you can do is to slow it down, is to pause, is to reflect, is to gather data, is to people who believe exactly the opposite. Talking about Kahneman, he takes it to the other level. He does what is called adversarial collaboration, which means I will collaborate with my adversary. So in the academic world, people who don't believe me or have an exactly the opposite opinion, I will talk with them. In the business situation, it means basically, as I said, encouraging dissent.
So Tapa, do you mind if we go a bit over? We've got 3 people lined up for questions. Would that be okay?
I'm good.
Great. Kanchan, go ahead, and then I will take Dr. Julie and then Bhavna.
Thanks, Sukirti. This has been a wonderful session, Sutapa, and I'm so glad I'm here today. So I'm the founder of Loan Genie. I'm based out of Bangalore. And before I jump into my question, there's one point I actually also would like to share that, regarding especially the difference between men and women. So I'd like to also focus on the various biological changes a girl or a woman faces every month, which is menstruation, and during which time I think, things are really different for a woman compared to a man. So I've seen, let's say, my own kids feeling really, first of all, puzzled by the whole thing and not really understanding what they're going through. With older women, it could be also, various flashes of desire maybe during this period, those kind of things. Also, it could also make a difference to your judgment as well, because if you're talking about coffee and tea making a difference to your opinion, here we are having biological changes in our body, which might reflect in our decision making as well, because maybe we are moody, maybe, so that was one point. The other one was when a woman especially undergoes or gives birth to children, the kind of bonding that she develops with her children is, that sort of comes into her decision making, into her life, in the sense that she becomes a more, I don't know, maybe a more kinder, more caring individual compared to what she was before giving birth to children, is one experience that I have especially observed in myself as a person. And I've also observed it in animals also. Like if you look at a mother who's taking care of her baby, she'll be more gentle and, she'll not be so aggressive. Whereas you have the male of the species trying to make sure that the environment is safe. So I think, of course, we are pretty much the same, men and women, but, because of certain changes which happen to our body, or because of the stages that we are in, we actually tend to develop very different ways to look at things. Is, one thing that I would definitely like to bring up. Of course, I believe in equality, but I also believe that, women also have special powers and men have their own special powers. While they are equal, but they have their own special powers which they should use. And if you are a gentle person, and you can be a great CEO. There's no person saying that gentle CEOs are failures. So I think it is just a matter of looking at people. We should, I believe that we shouldn't believe that non-emotional people, non-gentle people are the best, alpha personalities are the best. I think and
Kanchan, let's because we have lots of questions waiting, so I think we've understood your question. If we could get comment from Sutapa, because we have two more, if that would be okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so can we, not at all, not at all. So what I would suggest is, Suki, can we get the other questions, and then maybe I can answer it if it's similar rather than repeating, and that would have time. Yeah.
Dr. Julie, and then I'll take Dr. Bhavna. Go ahead, Dr. Julie.
Sutapa, as usual, dazzling, erudite, highly compelling.
One second, Bhavna. Go ahead, Dr. Julie.
So Sutapa, under all this dazzle and erudition, what I think is fascinating is that what I'm going to ask you is about the relationship between cognitive diversity, the evolving environment, and the first point that you make, which is so important in our lives: good decisions lead to bad outcomes. But is it not always almost, in hindsight, that decisions appear to be either good or bad, and errors of judgment also relate to who is interrogating and from whose perspective you're seeing that? And this relates to, I think, Urvi's point about success. Be so grateful if you can talk about that a little bit.
Fantastic.
Fantastic
Thank you, Dr.
question.
Julie. And Bhavna, we'll take your question also.
Hi, Sutapa. It's been a wonderful session. Thank you, Sipping Thoughts, and the other company, I don't remember the name. I'm 53. I have worked in my own company. I've run a factory, and started a new business in handicrafts and handlooms recently. And whenever I have to decide or take decisions or hire someone, I always feel what is the best way to go ahead. And then you mentioned the tests or the questions we need to ask, and we need to think about every decision, because I go to my husband when I want to decide something, but then you said that there is a scientific way. And my son, always says to me, he's 27, The Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck. He says that everything is scientific. We have to think scientifically. And how can I adapt all these ways so that I can run my life and business successfully?
And
I would like you to coach me if possible. This is what I was so looking for someone like this.
Sorry, Sutapa, one more question from my side. Sorry, and I'm going to also ask it now, so I don't have to do it at the end. So we had the Zomato, and it hired the 4 women. And you said it's what we see is what, I forgot the actual word. But do you think
see is all there is? Yeah.
Or what we see is all there is. So do you think that by Zomato making such a big move, it is going to make and compel more and more companies to see that it is okay, that they don't have to do that one woman that is by law required, that they're going to actually fill up their boards with women now? So that is my question. Sorry.
Okay. So, so I'll start with that, and then I'll go into the other questions that came up. So, to me, it was actually amazing that, and I'm not able to recollect, maybe in the world, there must be other companies which have an equal representation. But I was actually quite astonished when we, and the board, and most boards get formed get expanded prior to the IPO. So I joined also, I think, just about a month before the IPO. And I suddenly found that there were 4 women and 4 men. And it was fascinating because exactly what you said, it's people go with that typical 1 woman in the board. Today, I sit on boards, at least, I actually calculated the number. Out of 9, in 4 of them, there are more than 1 woman. Right. So that's, we've come a long way, but this is a company which has done this. And I was the one who actually told Dipender Goyal that, we can't not talk about this. And that's, how I helped him write that note, which he graciously acknowledged and which he put on his blog and which kind of went viral, which was on cognitive diversity. And that, and so certainly, the hope is that when people like him, who has that kind of reach, it's a company which in 13 years has a 1 lakh crore market capitalization, is doing something like that. Hopefully other people take notice and try to follow suit, right? So that's that. Which also brings me to this topic of cognitive diversity, which is a subject which is very, very close to me, because, I honestly don't like the way diversity is dealt with by most companies, where they only talk about, gender and because to me, it's not really understood. And the business reason why you need to have it is not understood. And when that happens, it's typically something that you pay lip service to in conferences, but you don't really do anything about it. But the question that Julie raised, cognitive diversity actually means the ability to think differently. Cognition is thinking, the ability to think differently. The ability to think differently largely comes from occupational differences. Now, 8 years ago, I was a banker. Now, my gender may be female, but I don't think I cognitively thought very differently from other men. And that's the point I'm trying to make when I say differences in brain, right? We thought the same way. I had the same blinkered way of looking at things, or not blinkered, whichever way you would like to believe, that a banker thinks, right? Today, after the last 8 years, I know I think completely differently. And I'm sometimes startled by how I look at a problem. And I can kind of think back at had I not taken the journey that I had in the last 8 years, how I would have thought. So that comes. So basically what we're talking about when we say cognitive diversity, it's essentially about the mental models about the world, how you think about that world, where are you coming from, right? And sometimes it comes from identity diversity, sometimes being a woman, the lady who spoke first, if you've nurtured, you've had 3 children and you've also, brought up another sister's kids, you would have a nurturing tendency, which is way higher than mine. I've got only one 19-year-old, right? And that was the first time I nurtured anybody, right? So I was as much a novice as my husband was, right? So I don't make the difference that there is a difference between a man and a woman. It could be because social norms have always kind of conditioned a woman to be the nurturer. Biology enables a woman to have a child. Biology does not enable a woman to be the nurturer. The nurturer, even in hunter-gatherer times, there were women hunter-gatherers, right? So if a man shared as much in the child rearing capabilities, and research shows that a child needs both parents to be there, the man would be as much a nurturer. And it is a fact that in a leadership, I thought you would ask me, because this is a leadership session about a leader's qualities. In a leader, a nurturing quality is actually one of the most important qualities to have, right? And if by social conditioning, a woman is more of a nurturer, that's to her advantage. But coming back to cognitive diversity, the ability to think differently comes from coming from different places, right? So to give it a very concrete example, if you were to have a marketing person in an organization who's done 20 years of marketing, a human resources person who has done 25 years of human resource, a finance person who's been a financial controller all his life, when they sit, which is what they need to do to arrive at a decision in an organization, that decision will at best be a compromise, because each person will try to guard his or her own terrain. What helps, and what I really encourage people in my consulting assignments to do, is if you're taking somebody in human resources, why would you take a person who's a professional of 25 years? Why would you not take somebody who's a failed entrepreneur, who's also run a business, who's also been on the marketing side, has been a business head, and has, you've got a team under that human resources professional who will have human resources expertise. So what you need here is somebody who is more credible to business, and somebody with a diversity of experiences comes with a far greater, enriched, broader mind. And that's the kind of people that you need. So similarly, in a board, there is this whole business of domain expertise. And I have a lot of problems with that, because you already have domain experts. If you're a marketing company, you already know marketing. What you need are people who come from outside and look at it, what's called the outside-in thinking. You bring in cross-domain expertise. I mean, we've not even talked about that. A lot of my work today is on innovation and cross-domain applications. That's the way of the future, and that's what you would need to do. So breaking silos, I mentioned Kahneman coming from psychology to win the Nobel in economics. There's a reason why I mentioned that. We're very, very siloed. A lot of what I'm talking about, I didn't know 8 years ago, because all of this cutting edge research stays in the silo called academia. It's made its way to a certain amount of mainstreaming has happened with Richard Thaler winning the Nobel, etc. in the Western world. It's exactly where it was in India. When I worked ages back, it's not changed. People have the same processes, particularly people practices are steeped in methods which are ancient. And that's because of siloing. Had I, not got off the corporate treadmill by design and by default, I would have believed exactly and continued to do what I was doing earlier. Would have gone up the hierarchy, but would have pretty much done the same thing. So that's about, breaking, those silos, and what Julie talked about and her question on cognitive diversity and how that enriches the decision process dramatically.
And we've got Bhavna's question, how to make decisions. And one last question I'm going to also ask you, because in COVID times, we've heard a lot about women leaders versus men leaders. And so that's why I'm going to put that out again, because they've said the women leaders have done a fantastic job in managing the corona situation versus a lot, and especially the way that they have handled it. Is it because of that nurturing quality? And I would like you to also reflect on Bhavna's question.
So, Suki, I don't know, to be honest, the answer to that, because I'm not sure, a lot of this, I make the difference always between what is anecdotal evidence and what is empirical evidence, right? Anecdotal evidence is what you've seen and I've seen, and two others have seen something very different, right? So I don't know whether there is any data, to be honest, about women having handled it better. A lot of women very proudly say that, they are multitaskers. Current research actually shows that multitasking is not the best thing to do. You need to focus on what you do one thing at a time. A lot of men also sometimes say, I'm also doing this and I'm doing that. So one is that you need to focus on what you're doing then. You need to take breaks, but you need to do it. What I'm a believer of, and what the pandemic has helped do, is I believe in a lot of permeability and fluidity between work and life. Right? Because, all of us need flexi time. You jolly well ought to have a life outside of work. I mean, you can't have work and family and that's all that there is. I have lots of consuming interests, and should most people. It builds resilience. You're not dependent on just that one thing. And if you have multiple interests, you need to have time for that. It's ultimately one life. So, the ability to have flexibility, to work when you want to be able to deliver results, and there are certain jobs where there are calls that you need to make, etc., which may define a certain part of your day. But this clear compartmentalizing between this is work and this is home, and never the twain shall meet, needs to go. I mean, the whole concept of creches, children, they're all part of your life, and why should they not intermingle? It's a completely backward mindset to think that will come in the way and prevent you from doing your job there. So that's what I feel, but I have no evidence, nor have I seen data which says that the pandemic has made people realize that women make better leaders than men. I'm not too sure. The only things which I will say regarding leadership is time and again, and it's not necessarily biological, but I think it's because of social conditioning, men have sort of been largely overconfident, right? They tend to go for a job faster, offer themselves more than a woman. A woman tends to, again, maybe because of social conditioning, I've not been that way myself, hold back, right? And I don't think that's good or bad. In fact, what I would say is today, if you were to ask me about leadership qualities, the qualities that I value today as great leadership qualities are not a high conviction person. To me, self-doubt is important. To me, belief updation is important. The ability to change your mind is important. As new data comes, you update your beliefs, which means open-mindedness, nurturing, curiosity. I'll put that, probably second in the list. The ability to not be narrow, but to look across domains, to read broadly, to look widely, to learn, to be curious. That is what is going to create both an innovative environment and an innovative mindset. So those to me would be key leadership qualities, and not how decisive you are or how strong a risk taker you are. You need to have plan Bs. You need to mitigate risk rather than, so that's in a nutshell, my belief.
All right, thank you. And I think we're out of time. So any closing thoughts, Sutapa, as we end for today?
No, I think we've kind of covered everything. I think there was just one part on the good decisions and bad decisions piece, which Julie brought up. And I'd mentioned that that's my byline. Good decisions can lead to bad outcomes, and bad decisions can lead to good outcomes. And I said, hence question mark. So, if the audience can sort of unmute, or you, Suki, or Urvi, you can suggest, or Julie yourself, you raise the question, what is it? So why is it that good decisions sometimes lead to bad outcomes and bad decisions lead to good outcomes? What happens? I'm posing the question back, and then I'll take it back and answer it.
So I've allowed people to unmute themselves. So go ahead.
Yeah.
So I have my answer to that. As a moment in time, it can appear a good decision, but life is dynamic, and other things can then impede it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other thoughts from anybody?
So lots of people have unmuted. Go for it, guys. So
The points that you've made, I think, have allowed us and pushed us, nudged us towards thinking in a more lateral manner than we usually think. And as a cultural studies scholar and teacher of literature, which is so aligned to life, as you know yourself, you're such a good, explicator of fiction. The point that comes through, and which I'm going to take away from you today, is that there is nothing written in stone. And the last few points that you made about Kahneman and coming from, actually changing disciplines from psychology to economics, that itself is an excellent example of how the ability to look across domains, look across and try to make the connections and interweave the different disciplines of life and work and art and science. I think that is what I take away from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Julie. Padma, go ahead. You're kindly raising your hand. Go ahead, Padma.
I'm just wondering, what is the definition of a good decision and a bad decision? Only then can we say, will it have a good impact or a bad impact, right? A good decision is normally something that you say, which has had good impact.
Yes.
Say it in retrospect. Oh, that was a great decision, kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
So how can the outcomes be bad? I mean, all I'm saying is, because the outcomes were good, you call it a good decision.
Okay. So, Suki, would we have more people who want to kind of, I don't know.
I think there is. Rashmi is trying to unmute. I'm trying to find her. Rashmi.
In the meantime, I would like to add to it.
Please, please.
A good decision could lead to a bad outcome if it has noise and bias embedded in it. And that's when, we lose the ability to view things holistically, and therefore not see the blind spot that brings with it.
Okay.
So we've got two more, Natasha and Rashmi. Go ahead, Natasha.
Yeah.
Hi, Sutapa. Thanks a lot. It was a real listening to you, honestly. I'm so inspired. Now, I have a very quick question, not about the decision, but my husband's a CEO, and this brings me to a question I want to answer. I have an answer from you. So if you're a CEO in a company in a foreign land, where all the people, the team that you have, they are foreign nationals, they're not of the same nationality, And plus they are from a nation which thinks in a particular manner, you know, they all would be thinking in a particular way. Of course, they would have their own biases. What is the best way to lead such a team without offending their basic, thought process and still getting the work done, if you know what I mean?
And Rashmi says decisions are made in the context and visibility.
Okay, so let me sort of, I've heard everybody, let me actually answer and also explain why I, put that as a byline in my email address, which is, what I said, that good decisions can lead to bad outcomes and bad decisions can lead to good outcomes. And I'm going to, I don't know how many people from the financial services world is here, but I'm going to use an example of a person who I use in my workshops. His name is Ray Dalio, and he founded Bridgewater Associates, which is arguably one of the largest private equity companies, hedge funds existing. Now, the whole idea is that apart from what we do, there is this external world and there is luck, which plays a disproportionately large part in our lives, right? And we insufficiently account for luck in our lives. So a good decision, we judge an outcome exactly as somebody mentioned in hindsight. If the outcome is good, we assume that the decision is good, but that may not be so. It could just be that we're lucky. I mean, I'm in an oil company and oil prices rose and profits increase. I'm just giving a very facetious example just to make the point. I have not done anything. There was nothing in my control. In the financial services world, there's a saying in Wall Street that don't confuse brains with a bull market, right? I mean, you need to be able to cut out the noise, something which Urvi mentioned, to be able to look at the signal. And the only way to do it is to analyze a decision. And analyzing a decision means the systems thinking that goes into analyzing a decision means it's not based on the outcome. The outcome can be shaped by luck. A good decision is what is the process that you used to arrive at that decision? Did you take a diverse set of views? Did you look at a lot of data? Did you look at the do the outside in thinking? Did you? So it's and again, would you do that for every decision? Obviously not. As I said, the size of a decision is commensurate with, how key a decision is commensurate with the time that you spend on it. You can't do this for every decision, right? So it is about analyzing a decision. Ray Dalio actually keeps a decision journal. He's got a decision tracker, right? So every decision is tracked, right? A bad decision can lead sometimes to a good outcome because of luck. A good decision can lead to a bad outcome, again, because of luck, because it wasn't in your favor. Too many things changed. The pandemic came and changed something without which the decision could have been great. So the only way to do this, and I personally believe that what you need to do is, particularly when the outcome is good, don't assume that the decision taken was good, but analyze, paralyze there, right? Because when the decision is bad, in any outcome is bad, anyway, we go into analysis paralysis all the time because the outcome was bad. What I'm saying is de-link the two, because there's this huge thing called chance, which we insufficiently account for, which comes in the way. So that's explaining that one question which I'd left unanswered.
Well, thank you, Sutapa. A lot of thinking
Very
about
much,
thinking.
very nice.
Thank you. Can we have your email address?
Sutapa, I will share with them. We've shared her LinkedIn. So please do connect with her on LinkedIn.
Thank you.
So that would be the best way. And like I said, so much to think about, so I hope this kind of got your mind kind of started towards this process. As Sutapa said, these sessions that she does are for hours. They're usually full day. I mean, the shortest one is 2 hours. We've tried to take it down into a very, very concise form. So thank you all for joining us. And please do keep leaving your thoughts with us, what kind of sessions you would like. And thank you, Sutapa. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Urvi.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Suki. Thank you, Urvi. And many thanks for everybody who spent so much time on a Sunday evening logging in and listening. Thanks very much.